And I always thought that was a weak position of just, sitting on the fence. And now I realise, of course, it's not a weakness, it's actually a strength to be able to step back and say, I don't have to agree, I don't have to step onto one side of the fence or the other, because that again fuels conflict. And there are many, many situations that once you're able to take that position of stepping back, you can realise that we are being manipulated into taking a side, for example, and that because we experience in the external world what is going on within us, then the more we hang on to these ideas that there's a conflict and we have to take sides, we're going to see conflicts in the external world.
Welcome to Heal and Learn. My guest today is Dawn Lester. She's a Substack writer. She's somebody who helps people recondition their minds to wake up to the freedom of reality. The subjects that she speaks on are vast and cover topics that we can't freely talk about on YouTube, but I encourage you to go to her Substack, Dawn Lester. Today we're going to speak about a very touchy subject that not many people talk about, which is assisted dying, which has become very popular, if I can use this term at all, in Canada, in some countries in Europe. And so the beginning of our conversation is not going to start with a smile, possibly, but we're going to speak about eliminating fear and how we live and the impact this will have on our lives. I'm welcoming Dawn. Hi, Dawn.
Hi, Zorina. Thank you very much for inviting me to have this conversation. It is an important topic, and yes, not an easy one, because death is not something that we're encouraged to talk about, really, and most people have a fear. So it's interesting, but important. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely an important topic. And I guess people that are members of certain Telegram groups that can be coined alternative and other media are aware of the topic of assisted dying, euthanasia. And so, they would be aware of the conversation we're going to be having, but a lot of people may not know actually what the subject matter is at all and why we're talking about that, and what difference it makes for us as individuals and as society. So can you tell us a bit about the latest developments in the regulations of euthanasia and in which countries? So a bit of an overview of the subject.
Okay. It came to my attention late last year because of legislation that's being debated in England. So of course it's starting to come to the forefront of people's minds in this country. When I first saw it, I was a little hesitant, and as I said at the beginning, I've written 2 articles about it, and the first one I was a little hesitant because it is such a touchy subject. Well, it's not touchy. I mean, it's a very sensitive subject, and there are various views. And I can imagine it could be fairly easy to upset various people because of raising this particular topic. But when I started looking into it, I really felt that it was something I could contribute to because of my many years of research into the field of health, because there are certain aspects that I feel people don't necessarily have through the mainstream, and I am being careful with my words here. I'm choosing them carefully. So for me, the most important aspect is freedom of choice. And so I'm not denying that people have the right to make choices over what they do with their lives. My preference is that people have all the information or as much as they can have to make truly informed decisions So they're making a choice from an informed place, not an emotional place, should we say, and also not a place where they've been given information that may not be quite as accurate as they think. And as I say, that's really where I wanted to join in the conversation, because part of the legislation in pretty much everywhere starts out with saying people have to be terminal, have to have received a terminal diagnosis, and the prognosis is that they won't survive beyond 6 months or something like that. So it's very much a situation whereby they aren't expected to live for very much longer. Now, the problem with that is that is not as accurate as people may have the idea, because there is something called the placebo or nocebo effect, in which people can receive certain information and actually take that on as being something real when it doesn't have to be. So people are probably familiar with the placebo effect, where that they can take a sugar pill and have a beneficial effect, even though there's no kind of active ingredient in what they've taken. So people, and the pharmaceutical industry.
Actually, there are some estimates that about 80% of all pharmaceuticals in the world are with a placebo effect.
Well, yes, and the pharmaceutical industry uses that in their clinical trials, so that they can measure the effect of the new substance, the new drug against, a placebo. And within those placebo, the control group, some people report benefits. Now, what is particularly interesting is that not everybody has the same response. And that is also important, because unlike the idea that the medical system has, we are not all the same. We have different ideas, we have different belief sets, we have different thoughts and beliefs. That each one of us is an individual, and so we aren't all the same. We aren't just this body isn't just a machine that they can add things to, take things away from, and we all have the same response. So that's the placebo. Now there is the opposite, which is the nocebo effect, where somebody could take something that is effectively an inert substance and have a detriment that can have a detrimental effect. I mean, one of them is, that could be shown by placebo-controlled trials of a chemotherapy drug, and some of the people who were taking the placebo actually reported having experienced the known side effects of a chemotherapy drug, except they were taking the placebo. Mm-hmm. So they actually manifested the negative effects of what they believed were the effects of chemotherapy drugs, and that includes losing their hair and vomiting. So these are not just minor effects, they're quite significant. So that takes us to, if you like, the work of Bruce Lipton, people like that, who say, we can manifest according to our beliefs. And that's where I was going with the assisted dying, that when people have a diagnosis for a particular label, and there's one in particular that is obviously the most common, which I'm not going to use, because again, that seems to be a trigger word, so I won't use it. And that can actually, the person can then manifest all kinds of problems within their body, and that can lead to their death. And there are cases where on post-mortem, that people have been found not to have sufficient pathology in their body to have warranted their death. And so this is where I wanted to join the conversation, to help people understand that not all diagnoses are necessarily, or of a terminal situation, are necessarily correct. And again, for an extreme example, looking at the example of
Nocebo manifesting, yeah.
Yes, well, Anita Moorjani, if you're aware of her, she was effectively on her deathbed some years ago and had a near-death experience. And when she returned to her body, her condition changed and she recovered from what was almost certainly going to be, you know, her last moments, and yet she recovered and is still alive and, you know, talking about her experiences. So
I'm aware of quite a few cases of instant remissions and what some may call
yes,
miracles. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yes, exactly. And the Institute of Noetic Sciences, that is, you know, the board director, Dr. Dean Radin, there's a document on the spontaneous remission talking about the number of cases, as you say. I mean, I'll just give the example of Anita Moorjani in case people have heard of her. But as you say, there are so many cases, so many examples. And what they also do is, having talked to on that IONS website, when they've talked to people who have gone through this, what they call spontaneous remission, they find there are certain characteristics that are common to these people who have recovered. And so that's the information that I try to share, that our mindset, our thoughts, our ideas, our determination can affect the outcome, or even after we've received a diagnosis of a serious condition. Now, I'm not denying, I want to say here, I am not denying that people suffer conditions, really chronic conditions, and are in a great deal of pain. They have all kinds of multiple problems, and I'm not denying that in any way. I'm urging caution with how these conditions are viewed when there is evidence that it is possible to change the outcome of a situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to talk about, of course, and develop the conversation in the programming and conditioning of the mind, and how we can avoid mind programming and condition our minds ourselves. But before that, just like a quick sidestep on the topic of euthanasia. Have you discovered any reasonable reason of why governments are advertising euthanasia? I've seen ads, and like in Canada, there was a video ad on euthanasia for teenagers.
Yes, and Canada's a case in point. It's possibly the guinea pig, because they introduced this legislation in 2016. Now, they're not the first country to introduce it. There were a few that brought it in during the 20th century. So I think about 3 or 4 countries or states in the US. It was pretty rare. It has been ramped up fairly recently, and certainly since 2016, when, as you say, it was introduced into Canada. Now, at the time when it was introduced, again, they had these safeguards to make sure that it was regulated, that it was only for people who were terminal, only for certain people in certain situations, only for, I believe it's 18 and over. So it was aimed at, you know, adults, competent. There was, you know, lots of these safeguards, which is the case where they're introducing it in England. You know, they're saying, oh, we have all these safeguards. That's what happens at the start. Now, in 2021, Canada completely relaxed those safeguards and those regulations. They took away a lot of those, and they've now seem to be making it something that is offered to people, you know, suggested, given as an option, which is not really how it. I'm being careful here. It goes against the original idea, which is to allow people to make those choices and to help them if they are in that situation, because for the most part, in many countries, helping someone to end their life is illegal. And I mean, people obviously can, you know, and do take their own lives, you know, and unfortunately the suicide rate for youngsters has increased certainly over the last few years for reasons that we're not, won't even start. But it's I believe people have freedom of choice, and they should have freedom of choice, and that shouldn't be taken away or legislated against. So to say, you know, it's illegal, you know, I mean, it's ridiculous to say it's illegal to take your own life, but to make it illegal to help somebody, because I know in this country at the moment, if somebody helps somebody go to another country to end their lives, if when they come back, they could be arrested and imprisoned for, I believe it's 14 years for helping someone, and that's possible. And again, there's circumstances. So that's quite strict. Now, I like I say, I believe in freedom of choice. So I believe there should be options for people who are in dire circumstances and make that choice for themselves, as long as they are making truly informed choices. But as you say, in Canada, it certainly seems to be being rolled out as an option of, well, you could do this,
this medicine or that medicine. It almost sounds like such an innocent thing to choose from. Yeah.
Yes, or you know, or there's this program where you can, you know,
yeah,
which I know and her name escapes me at the moment, but there is an a Canadian lady who was previously in the military, speaking out very strongly against the legislation in Canada, because it is now, as you say, being promoted. The age is being reduced, and it is being extended to people with so-called mental health problems, and that's another big rabbit hole, because how they diagnose mental health problems, you know, there's a general idea that it's a chemical imbalance in the brain, and that has never been proven. So that's another very, very grey area, to have a diagnosis of a mental condition and then say,
and who makes the decision when a person has a mental condition? Who makes the decision?
Precisely. And there, even though there's a, you know, a huge volume called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, that's put out by the Americans, by this, oh, right, by the, I think it's the American Psychiatric Society. Anyway, one of those big organizations, and I think they're on the 5th edition at the moment. And some of those diagnoses are pretty vague. So different psychiatrists may have different ideas as to which label to give to a certain person. So there is some, as you say, question marks, and who decides. And again, at the beginning, there are a lot of safeguards in terms of the legalities, and it's got to be approved by various people. And those are being softened and weakened. So that those, as I say, those safeguards are not there. It hasn't been extended to people with mental health issues at the moment, but that is definitely seems to be on the cards in Canada in, I believe, 2027. So within the next couple of years, unless they bring that forward. And also the age is being reduced. And interestingly, in the legislation in England, well, in England and Wales says 18 and over. And in Scotland, there's a different bill that was introduced earlier last year, so a year ago, about March 2024. And the age of consent there in the Scottish bill was 16. And, you know, the age of majority in the UK is 18. So they can't vote, but they can choose to end their life. And at 16, you know, I mean, anyway, so these are where
so easily influenced. It's terrible. Yeah.
Totally. So there, and there are situations where, you know, young people are having health problems, and there's a possibility of increasing health problems because of what's been going on over the last few years. So is this being introduced to cover that up? I don't know. It's worth considering. So these are the kinds of things I'm sharing to help people open up their view, so they start considering some of the aspects that aren't talked about in the mainstream, because it's usually assisted dying, but no, we need to improve palliative care. And I'm not against palliative care. At the same time, it's not based on how the body truly works. So it's not actually helping the person recover their health. It's merely extending the use of various pharmaceutical products to manage symptoms. So it's not about health, it's about managing symptoms.
Yeah, yeah. And then just one comment regarding the mental health definitions. I mean, if you look at Eastern philosophies, and actually there are quite a few cases that I personally know of people that have treated such cases where mental health issues were due to, I mean, for the ones believing in spirit and spiritual entities, these were caused by influences of spiritual entities. And yes, these can in turn translate into chemical imbalances as well in the brain. So what is the actual cause? This is such a deep subject that medicine cannot even touch the surface of at the moment. So to even consider the possibility of allowing assisted dying for such a person is insane when we don't even have the proper definition of what it is. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, as you say, it's a huge topic with what's called mental illness, and I have issues with that label, because it's being extended to, children who just fidget at school, possibly because they're not sufficiently stimulated. Yeah. So maybe they're, intelligent, highly active. Sitting still doesn't work for them. So because they won't sit, or they don't sit still, not that they won't, but they don't sit still, they're being given a label of
hyperactive. Yeah. Actually, the majority of children at the beginning don't sit still. It's human nature not to want to sit for a long time.
Well, exactly. And then then you're looking at the school system where there's a set time for each lesson.
Yeah.
And then, a bell goes, so you move on. So this goes back to a lot of the psychology experiments that were conducted in the 20th century. So, Pavlov's and the dogs and the ringing the bells. Yeah. And so this is all part of the conditioning. And because it's not just children of today, we've all been conditioned through our lives for certain things. So we have certain ways of behaving that may not necessarily be natural for us. So we're not being true to ourselves, and that can have an effect in the body and can accumulate if we're suppressing and repressing who we are and our emotions from various things that have happened in our lives and the way we've been treated or not allowed to express ourselves, and that eventually accumulates, and that can come out in various ways of, like depression, and accepting a job, shall we say, or some kind of employment that doesn't fulfill us, that doesn't give us access to expressing ourselves creatively. That goes on, that can build up all kinds of, just suppression and depression, and that can then receive a label, but that won't be fixed by taking any kind of pharmaceutical product, because it requires unpacking and releasing that repressed emotion. So, I mean, a lot of people are talking about, trauma release, those sorts of things. So it's not necessarily just trauma. Say just trauma. It's not necessarily trauma in something serious that we think of as a traumatic event in our lives. it may just be the accumulation of who we are being repressed and suppressed.
Yeah. Wow. Fantastic point of view that I haven't actually heard being discussed, but I totally agree. How can we recognize the signs of something significantly being suppressed in us, our true expression by conditioning?
Oh, I think we are all working towards getting a clearer idea of not living in a way that's true to ourselves. And it's different because we are all different. It's different for everyone. So some people are not prepared to look at that aspect of themselves, and they'll just carry on in their everyday lives and are happy to do so, or maybe not happy but don't have access to the information of looking into it, looking at themselves. They continue on this hamster wheel of life. And people have for me, people have to be open-minded. So there's certainly what's happened in the last 5 years has led a lot of people to start looking and questioning. So I think once people start questioning, they're more open to accessing the idea that we have been conditioned to believe things that are not true. And that's part of where my research into the field of health started, of looking at things that aren't true and discovering that a lot of what we're told about health is not true. And once you start on that, because that was the, if you like, the spearhead of that started in 2020. So it brought a lot of people into questioning and having a look at what's going on and learning that that isn't true, what we've been told about health, opens them up to looking at other things. And once they start looking at other areas, they can discover that there's a lot of things that we've been told that aren't true, which can be discombobulating, if you like, which I think is a lovely word, but it does express how people feel, just really unsettled, and can be distressing, until we then recognize that it requires us to look at ourselves, take responsibility. And as we do that, we then can help, reach out to other people, help other people, show them that it's okay to be sort of confused about what's going on. So when people are open-minded, we can reach out and we can share information, and then they can start seeing how they've been conditioned. There are, it would seem, some people who won't look, don't want to look, and that's fine. And again, I respect that. I'm not trying to impose on anyone, but when people are open-minded and are prepared to look, they'll then start realizing where they've been conditioned and how they can then come out of that conditioning and start taking responsibility, because that is very empowering and leads to more of a feeling of freedom that then encourages us to take more steps, because it's not just about changing our views and our ideas and our beliefs. It's about the actions that we then take in our lives. So it is that dual aspect of the beliefs of mind and the actions that we take in this physical state, in our actual lives, as human beings.
Yeah. I'm thinking that the majority of people that woke up around 2020 and started looking into these alternative views of the world, on any level, had already a lighter form of conditioning, which allowed them kind of to open up, while maybe people that were conditioned very firmly do not have this ability to kind of open up for other ideas. Or at least I have observed that people that had very firm ideas and were very convinced about the situation as it was, still maintain the same line of thought, and they try to adjust circumstances and explanations to fit their worldview. So it's not like people are all waking up and they're all open-minded and ready to change their conditioning. On the contrary, they're fighting for their conditioning. So it's a quite difficult situation, I would say. I mean, yeah, it's a matter of do you want it or not. It doesn't apply, it seems, to everyone. It's like you need to be somewhat mid-conditioned in order to get out of there.
Yes, and part of the conditioning is the idea of, the divide and conquer, that we have to take sides, that there's a this side and a that side, and we are given the impression, because it's not true, that we are supposed to take one side or the other.
Yeah.
So if we're on this side, then anyone on the other side is wrong, because they're, again, part of the conditioning is that we're either right or wrong. So if we feel we're right, then the others are wrong. And so that brings that conflict into play. Whereas, and it's really interesting, because when I was younger, I often could see both sides of a discussion and a debate. I could not necessarily sort of see all of the aspects of the arguments, but I was, I could hear both and think, okay, yes, there's, they've each got points, but not agree with either. And I always thought that was a weak position of just, sitting on the fence. And now I realize, of course, it's not a weakness, it's actually a strength to be able to step back and say, I don't have to agree. I don't have to step onto one side of the fence or the other, because that again fuels conflict. And there are many, many situations that once you're able to take that position of stepping back, you can realize that we are being manipulated into taking a side, for example, and that because we experience in the external world what is going on within us, then the more we hang on to these ideas that there's a conflict and we have to take sides, we're going to see conflicts in the external world. So, that's fueling the idea of, these conflicts. So if we can step back and say, no, I don't have to take a side. And in fact, maybe even though, each side has merit, I don't have to agree with either, because there are some aspects of each side that I might not agree with. And you say, well, maybe there's a third, fourth, fifth option. Maybe there are other ways to view it all. It doesn't have to be this either or, both and, and it's this conditioning, from school of, if we're asked something, we either get it right and we get a tick, or we get it wrong and we get this cross. We're told, oh, it's wrong. And nobody likes to be wrong. So, and at the same time, if we are, again, I don't even want to use the word mistake, but if there's something that we find isn't true, we can say, okay, well, that is an opportunity to learn, rather than, oh, you're wrong. And because when somebody's told they're wrong, they'll become defensive. Whereas if you say, well, have you looked at it this way? You're more likely to be inviting them to open up to seeing this other perspective. So, yeah, again, all part of the conditioning of trying to keep us separated. So again, that's to say, that's another one of my articles, that divide and conquer, just to show people that, this is, and I know a lot of people are already aware of that, but it was something I felt strongly about, to say, look, we're being made to choose, and we don't have to think about it, get people to think differently.
What other subjects do you write about? I went through your Substack. It had very interesting articles. If you could share some of the subjects.
Thank you.
Clearly, not all of them will be suited for YouTube, but whatever you could share.
Well, yes, I'll choose my language carefully. A lot of them revolve around health issues, certainly with respect to what has gone on or what started in 2020. to show people that what we have all believed, and I believed at one point that that certain invisible enemies are the cause of making us ill, and we've found that that isn't the case, and it isn't just the one that came to our attention in 2020. It actually applies to all of the so-called microbes, the germs, and so it's really to help people understand that there is no evidence that shows these invisible enemies cause us to be ill.
I have actually come across quite a few videos, so I think that we can speak freely about. I think the dismantling of germ theory is a thing on YouTube at the moment. So
okay, all right.
At least I've seen a few videos being still up there talking about.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. Some do stay there. I'm just, as I say, being cautious, because I'd hate to be responsible for you having a strike on your channel. So yes, dismantling the germ theory is really important, because within that is freedom from fear of something that doesn't do what we're told it does. So it's an unnecessary fear for people to still think that there are these invisible particles that can make them ill. They're being made to be fearful. And of course, that's one of the main strategies of these people who are trying to put out the propaganda, or putting out the agendas and the propaganda to support it, to make us live in fear, because they know that people in fear do not think critically, do not necessarily take appropriate action, and are much more easily manipulable and controllable. And of course that helps. So helping people come out of that fear is empowering, I think, and helps people, once they get to a place of feeling more empowered, they'll take, as I was saying before, they'll take certain actions, or in many cases, with what's been suggested over the last few years, they won't take certain actions, and they'll say, actually, no, thank you, I don't need that, because I know that isn't going to help me. And in fact, in certain instances, a certain thing may actually cause them harm. So again, this is helping people have the information that they can then use to make, as I said, informed decisions, truly informed decisions. And that's why the information in the most part is, or for the most part, is being censored. Although, as you say, some of these conversations are now being more readily available. There are other aspects. So again, and it's not about self-censoring. Oh, I'm not going to say it. It's just, I think the information is important to share with people, and we can use language in a different way.
Of course.
So that, because if this disappears from YouTube,
it doesn't do anybody any good. Yeah.
Nobody gets to hear it. And of course, the other thing with language is that we know how powerful it is in terms of influencing and creating and supporting our beliefs. So again, the language aspect is really important. So that's something else that I like to talk about in terms of the language. So again, going back to things like, all the health issues and these conditions, all these different labels are scary, and mental health issue, these labels contain
the programming. They contain the programming, yes.
Totally. And so people will buy into that. So that's the conditioning. So by being aware, and it's not to say, oh, you've got to be careful of all your words. It is to become more aware of the words that you use, and to realize how that is influencing your own experiences. So, I mean, the obvious one is, when people say, oh, well, I can't do that. Well, what do you mean can't? You mean don't want to, or, whatever. So it's what is it that you actually physically can't? I mean, there are some things that, people can't do, but it's to become aware of what we're saying, because we know how that influences and controls our experiences.
I'm just going to read a few of your other titles here, going from back to forth. Inappropriate use of AI, lab-grown food, climate activism. Is it really what we've been told? So these are the kind of topics that you may expect on the Substack of Dawn Lester. Homeopathy heals. Are you you have a course on?
No, it's not my course. It's a friend of mine, Lisa Strabak. It's her course. It's to help share the information with people, to spread that, because again, homeopathy is
A vibrational science, yeah. So it goes around goes along the same subject as the the germ theory. What was it called? The opposite of germ theory.
Well, it's called terrain theory, only it's not a theory,
Yeah.
but terrain. And at the same time, homeopathy goes beyond the physical, because there's, in terms of, it's more in terms of the energetics of
Right.
the substances, because they are reduced beyond anything that's physical. And at the same time, that ties into a discussion about water. And if you are aware of the work of Veda Austin, she's shown that, you know, there's so much more to water, and we are by volume 70, I think it's by volume 70% water. So it's important the way we think about water, the water that we ingest. And with Emoto's work, with I think it was with the rice, you know, the way we actually speak to
The Emoto,
water.
Dr. Emoto, you mean?
Dr. Emoto's work, yes. You know, with the emotions and how we express, and that's again goes back to what I was saying about the words. And in terms of bringing in AI into the medical system, it's to say that AI may have its uses, but it cannot replace
Human
the
consciousness.
human touch, human consciousness.
Yeah.
It cannot create, it cannot become conscious. And at the same time, AI is only as good as it is programmed. And if it is being programmed with incorrect information about how the human body works, it is, and you know, it's programmed to look for certain things in the body, but they are not the cause, they are the effects of something else. So it's not looking for the causes, because, and one of the things I do say in a lot of my articles is, you cannot solve problems without addressing, you need to address the root causes in order to resolve a problem. So unless the medical system is going to be looking at root causes to address them, which it doesn't, because even in their own literature, they say for a lot of what they call chronic conditions, that they don't know the exact cause. That they're not, you know, they don't fully understand the mechanism. They're not entirely sure. So there's a lot of vagueness on the causal factors, but of course they're very happy to then prescribe all kinds of products and pharmaceuticals and interventions that they allege will manage people's symptoms. But of course, the body is interconnected. So just because you're managing symptom, because there's a symptom in one part, it doesn't mean it's a problem in just that one part. It's a systemic issue. So, you know, that's why there are so many pieces.
Yeah, and also the same cause in various people can cause different symptoms, and different symptoms can be a result of a different cause in different people. So it's as you said, we're individuals. So
yeah, exactly. That's an extremely important point, that, you know, that the similar symptoms in different people may have different causes, because we're exposed to all, you know, a whole variety of different factors.
Environmental, yeah,
totally.
life, different life.
Yes, and including the emotional, psychological aspects and our belief systems, even within the same family. You know, we may have the same physical environment in the same family, but not, I mean, it's common that people will have similar beliefs, but not necessarily. You know, it's not always the case. You know, we are all individual.
Oh, I believe the majority of our viewers have witnessed at least quite a few of the people that I've been in contact with have witnessed the separation within families, or rather, at least in terms of opinion, around the 2020. I think that was a how should I say, maybe a part of the spiritual challenge even that we were subjected to be opposed by our own kind.
Yes, that was a challenge for a lot of people, and very, very difficult. And I've had conversations with people who have really struggled with this because they've been alienated by their family. At the same time, it's a question of, as you say, who that person is and whether they have the strength spiritually, emotionally, psychologically to stand by what they believe in, what they know is true, what they've discovered, and it's been very difficult for a lot of people. And of course, that itself can have all kinds of repercussions, because if everyone around you is opposing you, it shows strength of character to say, no, I'm going to stay with my own beliefs, with my, I'm going to stay true to myself. And it takes courage, and it can be really difficult. And it has been really difficult. And as you say, yeah, that's been a huge part of people's journeys over the last few years, and it's taken its toll on a lot of people.
Yeah, a lot of the work you do helps people move away from fear and into their own strength, right? So it's not like you're discussing only the follow-up effects of what's happened in 2020 and afterwards.
No.
It's an ongoing issue of us being subjected to fear-mongering.
Yes, it is my objective to help people recognize that recognize the situations where it's fear-mongering, where it's propaganda, where it's not true. That's not to say there aren't places where we may, it's not about being fearful, but being cautious, being aware. It's not to say, oh, well, everything's okay and we don't have to do anything. It's recognizing where we don't need to be fearful. And that is part of coming out of the conditioning, because the conditioning is to keep us in fear, to say, well, okay, that fear we don't have to have. So it is helping people empower themselves. It's not, I'm not intending, and the feedback is I'm not actually doing that anyway, is I'm not trying to just stay in the, what's called fear porn. There are a lot of people saying, oh, there's this and this and this going on. That's not my objective. It's to say, this is the story. This is not true because X, Y, Z. So we can ignore that story. So various stories that have come out that a lot of in some ways, so-called alternative media in many cases have been, staying with a fear-based story. I'm saying, this is what's being said, and this is what we know, what we don't know, and this is why you can just leave that behind, because that's not based on anything that's been proven. So as I say, it's helping people empower themselves, so that I'm not telling people what to do, it's helping them make their own choices. Again, I believe in freedom of choice.
If anybody, after checking your Substack out, and if they align with you, how can they get in contact with you? I know you offer some mentoring as well. It's not your main thing, but if anybody is up to a more personal touch.
Well, people can, if they subscribe and they receive my Substack articles by email, they can respond by email. And if they're interested in working with me, we can have an initial conversation and see what we can do, whether we align, and take it from there. So again, the initial conversation would be a complimentary one, and then see if there's a way we can work together, and and just take it forward from there. So yes, if people can communicate with me via Substack.
Dawn Lester, thank you so much. We started with a topic that was a bit a downer, but I'm happy we are ending on a positive note. Thank you so much for the informative talk. Everybody, Substack /Dawn Lester, correct? Is this your stuff?
dawnlester.substack.com, and Lester is Lester. So yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.